demonstrated by the observations on board Furious led to the inclusion of an aircraft carrier in the 88 Fleet program of 1918. The 7,470-ton HSH was laid down in December 1919 at Yokohama. 8. HSH was the second warship after the British Hermes to be designed from the keel up as an aircraft carrier and the first one towed completed as from the keel up. 8. In the 1920s, the larger percentage of aircraft that were initially acquired and inducted into service were land-based seaplanes whose main tasks were reconnaissance and anti-submarine patrols. The Japanese had drawn up plans for the formation of 17 squadrons of these aircraft, but budgetary constraints limited the units to 11 until 1931. Under the terms of the Washington Naval Treaty, 2 incomplete capital ships were allowed to be rebuilt as carriers, for the Japanese, Akagi and Amagai. However, Amagai was damaged during the Great Kanto earthquake in 1923 and Kiga became a replacement. Akagi was completed in 1927 while Kiga completed a year later. 14. With these 2 carriers, much of Imperial Japanese Navy's doctrines and operating procedures were established. When HSH was completed, little thought was given to naval aircraft in an offensive role. 15. And moreover, with only 1 carrier, there was insufficient consideration given to carrier doctrine within the Japanese naval establishment. However, in 1928 the 1st Carrier Division was formed with 3 carriers and the study of the role of aircraft carriers in a naval engagement was initiated. Because of the short range of carrier aircraft at the time, many in the naval hierarchy were still very much surface-oriented. They viewed carrier aircraft Mitsubishi B-1M torpedo bomber to be employed as support for the main battle fleet and not as offensive weapons. 15. Aircraft were to act as scouts and spotters, layers of smoke screens for naval gunfire, fleet air defense, and later, with the increase in aircraft performance, as a means to attack battleships and other surface targets. 15. Naval aviators, however, had a different perspective. Believing that a major aerial engagement to clear the space over the opposing fleets would precede the final surface battle, they increasingly considered the enemy's carriers as the main targets of naval air power. 15. Hence, in the early 1930s, the Imperial Japanese Navy adhered to no unified doctrine as to how carriers would be utilized in a fleet action and had no clear vision as to the role of air power in naval warfare. 15. But with the continued increase in the range and power of aircraft, carriers become acknowledged for their ability to strike at targets beyond the range of surface guns and torpedoes, including gunnery staffs as well as naval aviators. The IJN became convinced that carrier aircraft should be used for a preemptive strike against the enemy's carriers to achieve air superiority in the proximity of the surface battle. 16. Around 1932-33, the IJN began to shift its aerial focus from targeting the enemy's battleships to the aircraft carriers, and by the mid-30s, with the improved performance of bombing aircraft and particularly dive bombers, the destruction of the enemy's carrier force became the primary focus of Japan's carrier forces. 16. The emerging concept of a mass aerial attack also shifted the emphasis away from the protection of the main battle fleet to attacks on targets over the horizon. Essential to the implementation of such a tactic was the locating of the enemy before the enemy found the Japanese carriers. As a consequence, it was important to the Japanese that naval aircraft be able to outrange the enemy in the air just as Japanese surface forces could do by naval gunnery and torpedo attacks. Subsequently, throughout the 1930s, Japanese naval aviation emphasized range in its specifications for new aircraft. 16. Land-based air groups. In addition to developing carrier-based aviation, the IJN maintained many land-based air groups. In the early 1930s, The Japanese created a new category of aircraft termed Rakujo Kokiki, land-based attack aircraft, or RAKO for short. 17. This was in keeping with the strategy of providing a rapid defense of the home islands against the possible westward advance of an American naval offensive across the Pacific. 16. Land-based aircraft actually provided the bulk of Japanese naval aviation up to the eve of the Pacific War. In this regard, Japan was unique among the three major naval powers. During the interwar period and the immediate pre-war years, with only the two air wings of the U.S. Marine Corps being analogous to Japan's land-based naval air units. 16. The creation of these air units had begun at the end of World War I, when plans had been drawn up for 17 of them. However, these plans were not fully implemented until 1931. They were to be located at 6 air stations around the Japanese home islands: Yokosuka, Sasebo, Kasumagura Onyora, Tateyama, and Kyo. These units were composed of various types of aircraft, which were mostly planes. In absolute numbers, land-based aircraft provided the largest growth in Japanese's naval air power in the years before the Pacific War. 16. The Circle 1 naval expansion program, which had been formulated in 1927 and put into effect in 1931, called for the creation of 28 new air groups. Although only 14 groups were actually established by 1934, which was a response to American naval expansion under First Vinson Plan, the Circle 2 program called for 8 additional air groups to be created by the end of 1937. They were to operate out of 6 new air stations at Minato, Siki, Yokohama, Maizuru, Kanoya and Kaisarazu in the home islands, and Chini on the southern coast of Korea. Under the pressure of the Second Vinson Plan, initiated by the United States, the Japanese increased the momentum in building up the land-based air forces. The deadline for completion date of the aviation of the Circle 1 expansion moved up to 1937, and an all-out effort was also made to complete the aircraft production of the Circle 2 program by the end of the same year. 16. By the end of 1937, the Navy possessed 563 land-based aircraft, in addition to the 332 aircraft aboard its Scoria fleet. 16. The Navy Air Service had a total of 895 aircraft and 2,711 aircrew, including pilots and navigators, in 39 air groups. 16. Although this total 895 aircraft was considerably less than total American naval air strength for the same period, Japan's land-based aviation force was substantially larger. The substantial land-based air power worked to Japan's advantage when the nation went to war in 1937 with China. 18. Expansion 1931-1937. A stern view of Akijai off Osaka on the 15th of October 1934. On deck are Mitsubishi B-1M and B-2M bombers. By 1927, Japanese naval aviation had grown sufficiently in size and complexity that it was necessary to consolidate the administrative organization of the air service. The various air operations and activities during peacetime, which were divided between the Navy Ministry and the Navy Technical Department, were now merged into a single Naval Aviation Department. 14. In 1932, an independent naval air arsenal was also established to streamline the testing and development of aircraft and weaponry. During their early years, these organizations were under the command of able air enthusiasts, who played a major role in the rapid expansion of Japanese naval aviation during the following decade. The London Naval Treaty of 1930 had imposed new limitations on warship construction, which caused the Navy General Staff to view naval aviation as a way to make up for the shortcomings in the surface fleet. 14. In 1931, The air service pushed for and established the remainder of the 17 air squadrons that had been projected in the 1923 expansion plans. 14. These were eventually combined into 6 air groups, Kokitai, located at 6 bases around Japan. Furthermore, the Circle naval expansion programs featured an additional 12 air groups. They also included development of specific aviation technologies and the acceleration of aircrew training. The Circle 1 Air Plan concentrated on developing new aircraft types, including large flying boats and land-based attack aircraft, as well as the building of seaborne units, both float planes and carrier aircraft. The Circle 2 Plan continued the build-up in naval aircraft and authorized the construction of 2 aircraft carriers. 14. Shanghai Incident, 1932. In January 1932, clashes between Chinese and Japanese forces occurred in Shanghai. On 29 January, several aircraft from the seaplane Tendanitaro, anchored in the Yangtze River, carried out low-level attacks on Chinese military positions in Jibi, on artillery positions outside the city and on an armored train at a railway station in the northern part of the city. 19. There were heavy civilian casualties and property losses partly as a result of crude bombing techniques and mechanisms at the time. 20. The 3rd Fleet, consisting of the 1st Carrier Division with the carriers Kiga and HSH, was also dispatched to the city. Kiga arrived off the entrance of the Yangtze River on the 1st of February, and was joined by HSH 2 days later. On board were 10 fighters and 9 torpedo bombers, while Kiga had 16 fighters and 32 torpedo bombers. 21. Altogether, the Japanese had 80 aircraft that could be deployed over Shanghai, mostly Nakajima A-1N2 fighters and Mitsubishi B-1M3 torpedo bombers. 19. On the 3rd of February, a number of the aircraft from the 2 carriers were deployed to Kunda Airfield, where they flew missions in support of Japanese ground forces. Aircraft from HSH participated in the IJN's first aerial combat on the 5th of February. When 3 fighters escorting 2 bombers were engaged by 9 Chinese fighters over Zhenru, 1 Chinese fighter was damaged. 21. On the 22nd of February, while escorting 3 B-1M3 torpedo bombers, 3 fighters from Kiga, operating from Kunda Airfield, scored the IJN's first aerial victory when they shot down a Boeing 218 fighter, flown by an American volunteer pilot Robert Short. 22. After gaining intelligence that the Chinese were planning to mount a counter-offensive, the Japanese bombers carried out attacks on Chinese airfields at Hangzhou and Suzhou between the 23rd and the 26th of February, destroying a number of aircraft on the ground. 23. On 26 February, 6 A-1N2 fighters from HSH, while escorting 9 bombers from Kiga on a bombing raid on an airfield at Hangzhou, engaged 5 Chinese aircraft and shot down 3 of them. 23. The Japanese carriers returned to home waters after a ceasefire had been declared on 3 March. 24. Air crews of Kiga received a special commendation from the commander of the 3rd Fleet, Vice Admiral Kishizawa Nomura, for their actions. 20. The actions of the Japanese aviators over Shanghai represented the first significant air operations over East Asia, and for the IJN it also marked the first combat operations from its aircraft carriers. 23. The attack on Jibi was also the most destructive aerial attack on an urban area until the Kondor Legion's attack on Guernica, 5 years later. 23. Although perceived as insignificant skirmishes, the resulting aerial campaign led to several conclusions. Though the A-1N2 fighter proved to be inferior in performance to the Boeing 218, the campaign had demonstrated the above-average flying skills of the IJN's pilots and the relative precision of its bombing techniques during clear weather. 23. China War, 1937-1941. Kicker conducts air operations in 1937. On deck are Nakajima 2 NHED-10 and Mitsubishi B-2 aircraft. From the onset of hostilities in 1937 until forces were diverted to combat for the Pacific War in 1941, naval aircraft played a key role in military operations on the Chinese mainland. The IJN had two primary responsibilities. The first was to support of amphibious operations on the Chinese coast, and the second was the strategic aerial bombardment of Chinese cities. 25. This was unique in naval history.